All right, let's dive in. Today, we are tackling one of the most intense and deeply personal topics out there, the ethics of abortion. But we're going to look at it through a very specific lens, the lens of philosophy.
You can't turn on the news or scroll through social media without seeing it. It's all politics, protests, and breaking headlines. It's really easy to get swept up in that day-to-day battle.
But what if we just peeled all that back for a minute? Underneath all the noise, there are these huge, timeless questions about life, what it means to be a person, and what our responsibilities are to one another. And that is the conversation we're going to explore right now.
So, just to be super clear, in this explainer, we're not talking about laws or politics. We're zeroing in on the moral philosophy of abortion. And to do that, we're drawing our map directly from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy to unpack the core arguments that have shaped this entire debate for decades.
Okay, so where do we start? Well, let's begin with the most common and, for many people, the most intuitive argument against abortion. It's all built around this powerful idea of a right to life.
The real strength of this argument is just how logical it seems on the surface, right? It's like a chain. Step 1 leads to step 2, which leads to step 3, and so on. If you accept each link in that chain, then that final conclusion, that abortion is morally wrong, feels almost undeniable.
But this is what philosophers do best. They poke at arguments that look perfect on the outside to see if there are any hidden cracks. And in this case, they zoom in on one tiny but incredibly important word from the very first step, person. What do we actually mean when we use that word?
And here is where things get really fascinating. It turns out the argument might be playing a little trick with that word. See, person can mean two different things. A fetus is, biologically speaking, a human being, a member of the species Homo sapiens. That's a scientific claim. But the argument gets its moral punch from the idea that a moral person has a right to life. The whole argument hinges on this unspoken and pretty controversial assumption that being a biological human automatically grants you full moral personhood from the instant of conception.
So how do you even begin to test an idea like that? Well, a philosopher named Judith Jarvis Thomson came up with one of the most famous thought experiments ever to do exactly that. She says, okay, let's pretend for a second that the fetus is a person with a full right to life from conception. Now, let me tell you a story.
It starts like this. You wake up, you're not in your bed, you're in a hospital room, and you quickly realize you're not alone. It turns out you've been kidnapped by a group called the Society of Music Lovers. There's a world-famous violinist in the bed next to you, and he's unconscious. He has a rare kidney disease, and you, without your consent, have been hooked up to him because you are the only person on Earth with the right blood type to save him. The doctors tell you that if you stay plugged in for 9 months, he'll be cured. But if you unplug yourself at any point, he will die.
So here's the question, the big one. The violinist is definitely a person, and he absolutely has a right to life. No one disputes that. But does his right to life mean he has a right to use your body against your will for 9 months? Are you morally obligated to stay? Is it wrong to unplug?
Thompson's answer is a game changer. She argues that it is morally permissible to unplug. It would be incredibly kind of you to stay, a truly heroic thing to do, but it's not something you are required to do. You have the right to say no. And this is the genius of the thought experiment. It completely reframes the debate. The violinist's right to life doesn't give him a right to everything he needs to sustain that life, especially not your body against your will. So unplugging isn't seen as an act of murder, but as an act of withdrawing life support that you were never obligated to provide in the first place. This idea just blew the conversation wide open.
Okay, so Thompson's argument really challenges what a right to life actually entitles you to. But there's another major argument that takes a totally different path. It comes from the philosopher Don Marquis, and it tries to avoid getting tangled up in debates about personhood at all.
Marquis asks a simple question. Why is it wrong to kill an adult like you or me? He says the main reason is because you're robbing them of their future, all the experiences, relationships, and joys they would have had. And then he applies that same logic to a fetus. He argues that since an abortion also deprives the fetus of a valuable future like ours, it's wrong for the very same reason. Now, the big pushback on this idea gets into what it really means to have a future. Is just having the biological potential for a future enough, or do you need to have some kind of psychological connection to that future? Things like memories, desires, plans for tomorrow. The argument goes that since an early fetus doesn't have any consciousness or intentions, it can't really be deprived of a future it doesn't even know exists. Okay, so we've been deep in the world of philosophy and thought experiments, but it is so important to ask, why does any of this matter? What are the actual, real-world stakes here?
Well, this is about so much more than just the physical experience of pregnancy, which is significant in itself. It's about the life-altering reality of becoming a parent. It's about a person's basic autonomy, their right to control their own body and decide the path of their own life. At the end of the day, it all comes back to that one central philosophical question. Does a fetus have a full right to life from the moment of conception? Because how you answer that question changes everything.
So, we've walked through the right to life argument, we've tested it with the famous violinist, and we've looked through the lens of a future like ours. These aren't just academic games. They're like tools for your mind. They're designed to help you think with more clarity and precision. The goal isn't necessarily to find one simple answer, but to ask better, sharper questions about one of the most profound moral challenges we all face. So, how does having these tools change the way you see the debate?